the premise is, do rebuilds actually work? And short answer, yes.
Eventually.
But I really wanted to look at this because it breaks down kind of the timeline of how long they normally take. And the big question that we usually get is like, what's the Flyers timeline? And, the joke, they're like 2 to 3 years away. They have been for 20 years now.
Right.
But I really wanted to take a look at this because this article breaks down like how long it usually takes to go from bad to good and where are the Flyers in this process. The article was written by Paul Paduti over on Adjusted Hockey over on Daily Faceoff, and it's pretty detailed and there's some good information here. So just to take a look at what a rebuild is for the purposes of this exercise, Charlie. They outline a rebuild as a rebuild starts when a team has at least 2 bottom 10 finishes, including a bottom 8 finish in a 3-year period. So an extended period of basically drafting in the top 10, including one really bad season at least. And a rebuild ends when you turn that corner. It's defined as you make the playoffs in consecutive years, or you just win the Stanley Cup in that first year. Your rebuild's over that first year. You go to the playoffs. But it's over typically when you make the playoffs in consecutive seasons. And looking at that, just want to take a look at where the Flyers are. So by that definition, the Flyers in the list of teams currently rebuilding, they have been at this now for 4 years. Since 2022,
right.
They have been going about this little rebuild. They haven't made the playoffs. They've missed it in consecutive years, and they've had some bottom 10 seasons in there. They're rebuilding. Now, before we went live, you were like, well, the one thing about this article, it doesn't make a distinction between intentional and unintentional.
Yes.
Like
you could say the Flyers rebuild began in 2022, but I can assure you, I covered the team. They were not intentionally rebuilding in 2022. They got the 5th overall pick, but they didn't want it.
No,
they thought they were building a good team. They were just wrong and bad at their job.
They just stunk, and that's why we got a year later an entirely new regime.
Yes, 2023 is when the intentional rebuild started.
But based on this criteria, like you're bad for this amount of time, and like whether they're trying to or not, they picked 5th. So that's it. It fits in with that criteria, and based on that, you look at where the Flyers are. It typically takes, they're looking to turn the corner. I know they're looking to be better this next season. They're not looking to draft in the top 10. They're hoping to be on the playoff bubble to contend, to play the meaningful games in March and April. But there's a really good chance, say a couple of things don't work out. The rebuild isn't over yet.
Right.
The rebuild ends, like I said, when you make the playoffs consecutive seasons. So they are in this, they're in this period of, okay, they're year 4 of this thing, but a lot of teams a lot worse off, Charlie, because when you look at how long a rebuild typically takes, it's especially to get into the contention area, like the rebuild timeline, teams take a lot longer than 4 or 5 years for the most part to get to that period where you are consistent. You make it consecutive years.
Right,
There's not just like they use the example of that one Colorado team that was, the one Patrick Waugh team that was awesome, and then the next year sucked again. Like, no, their rebuild didn't end.
Right.
Like, they use that. And you look at how the timeline usually goes to get from missing 2-3 years in a row to making it consecutive seasons. It took a long time, and it took a really long time for some of the top contenders in the league, like the Panthers. They're on, like, rebuild 3 by the time it actually happens. The Flyers, it feels like are ahead of schedule, but do you think they're rushing it a little?
So here's my thing. I'm itching seeing this chart because there are so many assumptions in this chart that bother me.
Okay.
It's lacking nuance, and I'm going to break down the nuance here. Like, you could say the Panthers were rebuilding for 20 years. The Oilers were rebuilding for 15 years. They took that long because they had multiple rebuild attempts that failed. It's not like they were just rebuilding and rebuilding and rebuilding. They had multiple regimes. So in some cases, they had multiple ownership groups going through. They changed the way they were doing it multiple times. They just failed multiple times. And then finally, the last rebuild attempt actually worked. What I will say is that if you're looking at like how long a successful rebuild can take, because I think that is the more appropriate question. I'm looking at teams further down the list. I'm looking at, okay, let's go through here. The Kings,
I love the Kings 2.0 example.
I think Kings 1.0 is the better one for me because
Okay.
Kings 2.0, while it created a good team, it didn't create an actual cup contending team. They can't beat the friggin' Edmonton Oilers even once in like 4 straight years. To me, they are, to use a comment from our from a commenter in our Discord, they are frauds. So like, yes, they're not rebuilding anymore, but they are a fraud team. They can't even make it out of the first round. I look at Kings 1.0. That took 5 years. That is an ideal, successful rebuild. I look at the Capitals, took 5 years. That was the Ovechkin Capitals. That's a successful rebuild. The Penguins, the Crosby, Malkin, Fleury Penguins, 6 years. That's a successful rebuild. I think if you're looking at the teams down the bottom, that is like 5, 6, 7 years. That is a reasonable time frame for how long it takes for a successful rebuild to work. But if you're looking at the ones at the top, like the reason why it took the Oilers 15 years is not because they were actually intentionally rebuilding for 15 years. It's because they tried to rebuild like 3 times and it only worked the 3rd time.
You look at the Blackhawks, 12 years. It's because their games weren't on TV, so they had no revenue.
Yeah.
So they were just kind of bad for a long time. But I will say, while you definitely make a great point there, it does show you while rebuilds eventually do work for the most part, varying degrees of success, and we'll get to that in a minute. A lot of times there's a misstep, and you have to go back. And that's why I like the Kings 2.0 thing, just in that it's more recent, and I think a lot of the teams at the bottom benefit, the shorter rebuilds. It's early cap era, so you didn't have 5 years before that of screwing up.
I totally
You didn't
agree
have 5 years before that of screwing up the cap that you have to dig yourself out of before you can even really start to add. I like the Kings 1.0. I like the Carolina, because they started with pieces. And that's kind of what the Flyers are doing in retaining Travis Konechny, Travis Sanheim, even though they tried to trade him, he's still here. You have the pieces, you already have a little bit up against the cap, and then you rebuild on top of that. And I think that's more the Flyers model.
I think that if you're saying, okay, what's a model for a team, a timeline, and a team that rebuilt, I think the way the Flyers want to do it, and also eventually build a team that was real, real good. It's that Lightning one. That took 8 years because that's a team where they drafted well, they got a lot of core pieces, they stockpiled talent, and then they became a team. While they didn't win until after 2015, that opened their window of being real good, and they've stayed real good for 10 years. If I were to point out one team on that chart that I think the Flyers look at and they're like, that's what we want to be, I think it's Tampa Bay Lightning, because that's a team that did it in the cap era, where they started their rebuild in 2008
to 15,
and they're still good. Because the Flyers don't want their rebuild to be, we go all in and we're good for 3 years and then we stink. We have to do it all over. They want to be the kind of team where once we get to that point, we stay at that point and we make the playoffs every year for a decade plus, which is what the Lightning have done.
And we've talked about that. We've even said, Danny Briere, his forward thinking, for my liking, I'm like, what GM keeps their job for 10 years? But maybe he has that job security, and maybe he has that confidence that he's able to do it. The forward thinking, I want to keep this thing because the Lightning had their peak, and they're not that anymore. They're still in the playoffs every year. They're still really good. They're just a 100-point team.
I mean, they lost to Florida, who ran over everybody. If they would have had an easier route, maybe they're a conference finalist team this year.
It took the Panthers 20 years to get to where they are. Tampa, they have been really good for a decade. And that's the kind of timeline it takes. I guess, when I look at this, though, it does give me the anxiety of there's going to be a misstep. There's going to be a step back at some point. There's going to be, between now and, Michkov, he's not 21 yet. Between now and him turning 26, 27, 28, there's a really good chance we're back in this spot again, just based on these numbers. Based on the history of how this goes, there have been a lot of missteps. Yes, the Penguins nailed it, and it's because they got a generational player and other superstars with it. We talked about Chicago the other day. They get Patrick Kane.
They got Kane and Taves.
You get Duncan Keith in the second round. These things just kind of worked out for them. You have to have the hits. You have to have some luck. But this does take a while, and this idea of turning the corner and being a cup contender in 2027, I don't know if that's likely, based on this information.
I don't know if that's realistic either, but really what it depends upon is how much faith you have in Danny Briere. Because the point I'm making is you can't look at like, well, it took Florida 20 years, it took Edmonton 15 years. Oh God, we're in for another decade of nothing. Like, yes, we will be if it turns out that Danny Briere stinks at his job. Because then what's going to happen is this rebuild attempt is going to fail. The Flyers are going to go back into picking in the top 5, top 10 for 3-4 more years. Danny and everybody's going to get canned, and then there's going to be a new group that is going to try their attempt at a rebuild. If Danny is good at his job and does successfully pull off a rebuild, I think it's reasonable to think that it could come in the 5 to 8 year range. I think that like we should disabuse ourselves of the notion that a rebuild can happen in 2-3 years. But 5 to 8 years, going at the low end being Capitals, being, oh, we got Alex Ovechkin, great. And the high end being the Lightning of we just drafted really well and built up a lot of really talented young players and then, just ran with them for a decade. 5 to 8 years, I think, is a reasonable timeline to expect if the guys at the top are making good decisions. And we're all hoping they are.
And when you look at the results of these rebuilds, whether it took 20 years or just a few, the question, the thesis, does it work? Yeah. Like even the teams that haven't won the cup, and you look at the teams that did win the cup, obviously that's the goal. And
this is why I call the Kings frauds. 4 times playoff streak.
Yeah,
hang that up as a banner.
4-time playoffs.
We've been to the playoffs 4 straight years.
At least even
Let's celebrate it.
At least even that Coyotes team, it's like, well, they got to a conference final. And listen, I forgot about that. There are examples of it. You didn't get where you want. Even the Rangers, like President's Trophy, like, oh, cool. Regular season champs. Way to go. There is a ton, not even the cup teams, but just, all right. The path does work if you do it right, as Charlie's saying. If you have confidence in Briere and it only takes 5-8 years, it does work. But there are often missteps, and maybe not even once you get to that. Oh, well, now we're out of the rebuild. Like, okay, yeah, the Penguins 7 years, the Hurricanes and that very, right out of the lockout 3. But a lot of this is, 12th year out of the lockout, 14th or 12th year out of the rebuild, 14th. Right. That's when you finally do it. And I think that just speaks more to like young teams don't win. Like you've accumulated.
That's true.
You've accumulated all these pieces. Like the Blackhawks are an anomaly.
Yeah,
like
it's pretty rare.
They were in the conference final and then they won 3 cups in 5 years. Like that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It can
happen, but it's hard.
It's
real hard.
Very rare.
Usually teams have to have that like 3-4 year. I mean, look at the Lightning. Lightning, a perfect example.
Yes.
They needed to make a cup final and then have the biggest choke job in the world in the first round before they're like, all right, we're ready.
We went to 3 straight and won 2 of them.
Yeah.
Like that's when it happens. But the question, does it work and are they on the right path? I think so. Like just based on this information, I like the way they're going. Could they have more high-end picks to kind of guarantee it a little better? Sure. But just with the plan they have, I think it is doable in this 5 to 8 year span you're talking about. Maybe not next year.
And I do think that, as much as earlier this week I mentioned that it's disappointing that they didn't come out of this draft with a center solution. I think they're doing it the right way in that they've drafted in the top 10 twice in the Danny Briere era, the Briere, and they came away with a potential superstar in Matvei Michkov, and then a guy in Porter Martone who, like, if he wasn't a wing, he probably goes top 2.
Yes.
Like, these are high upside guys that could be 2 of the best players on a cup contender, and in their 2 times in the top 10, they got those guys. Now, they need to do more. They need to get more guys that play premium positions, but both of those guys have the plausible upside of being due to, they're at the top of the scoring charts for a really, really good team.
I feel like it bodes well when we talk about this 5 to 8 year thing. It's about when Zavragin comes over. Like in terms of, we're in year 4, call it.
Yeah.
That's
I think it bodes well. Lightning needed a Vasilevsky.
They needed that even when they had Ben Bishop. It was like, well, we need a little more.
And they got him.
And then they got him. So it scared me because of all the missteps you see in there and the amount of time it's taken the best teams to get where they were. But it also provided me with a little bit of faith that, okay, if they stay on the right path, and like we said, maybe the biggest check mark, maybe the biggest thumbs up I can give Danny this offseason is you didn't do anything dumb.
Yep.
All right, great. We are
Just
on the right.
keep not doing dumb things.
Yeah, just keep not doing dumb stuff, and it'll eventually work out. I think that's the. I think,
hope so.
Yeah. All right. That's it. That's the shootout for you today. Just a little talk about rebuilds, how long it's going to take, and do they work? Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Bill. That's Charlie. Be excellent to each other.